fifth storyteller is Angel. Angel is also a dreamer who came to California at the age of 10. He received his BA in Latino Studies and Spanish from San Francisco State University and his master's in teaching credential from the University of San Francisco. He is currently a teacher in East San Jose, and it's my pleasure to present to you Angel.
So first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Elliot for extending this opportunity to us to be able to tell our stories and give us a voice, because that's something that a lot of us undocumented dreamers don't have, hiding behind shadows and trying to make sure that the least amount of people know about our situation. So I'm really grateful to be able to stand here and tell you guys this story. And I want to make sure that you guys remember that this story, my father's story, is not unique. It's a story that repeats often, way too often, and I am constantly reminded of. And anybody who's been through this situation gets reminded of every single day. For me, when I wrote about this, I was reminded of through a letter that arrived at our home addressed to our father. So I guess the story begins in 1996 when I was 4 years old. My brother, my mom, myself, and my father lived in this small town in Michoacan, and we didn't have running water. We barely had electricity. We didn't really have a ceiling, and we struggled every single day to make a living and just to survive in general. So my father took it upon himself to travel to El Norte, to the United States, and try to become a better supporter for us from there. I actually don't remember much about my dad from back then. I don't remember what he looked like or how he was. I just remember that my mother told us that he left on a plane. So every time I would see a plane fly by Singio, municipio de Álvaro Obregón in Michoacán, Mexico, I would go outside and I would wave and I would wave and I would scream, "Papa, papi, adios," because I saw that plane was the one that he was traveling on. Over the next couple of years, we settled for communicating through phone calls with him, letters that he would send every once in a while, and a little bit of money that he could send to us. But it was hard, especially hard on my mother, who had to keep working, and now she was also being my father and teaching us all of the fatherly things that somebody was supposed to teach us. At some point, my dad came back to visit. He knocked on the door, and me and my brother opened it, and then we saw this huge, scary-looking brown man. We couldn't recognize him. He had more muscle than anybody I had ever seen, even struggled to just come in through the doorway. He looked scary, and he looked really proud, and that's how I remember him. When he told me he was my dad, I just kept touching his face, trying to make sure that he was real and not a figment of my imagination. And that's the way I remember him. He had this look on his face like he had it all figured out. 30 days later, he left again. After waiting for another year, my mom got tired and she decided that it was time for her to leave as well. And then in 2002, she sent for my brother and I to come to the United States. In the United States, we did fairly well. For the first couple of years, though, we stayed in this immigrant home where a lot of families lived. There was many of us living in that home. Eventually, though, we made our way out of that home, and my mother and father had stable jobs. My brother and myself kept up with our studies, and we kept out of trouble. My mother worked really hard at the beauty salon she was at, and my father had been in construction for over 10 years, so he was really well known around the area and always had a job lined up. So I guess you could say we were making strides towards that American dream, and we really never expected anything to happen. And then it did. It was my freshman year in college, and I was excited. I was a college student, but not just any college student. I was an American college student. It's that, the ones that you see on the TV, that was gonna be me. I was excited. So that weekend, I decided to get in my car and go to Stockton, where I was gonna party and have some fun and do American college student things, whatever that is. 5 minutes after arriving there, we got this phone call, and it pretty much shattered me. I got back in my car and I drove back to Redwood City as fast as I could, arriving to the outside of the Redwood City Correctional Facility where my entire family was waiting. As I stepped out of the car, my family members, one by one, turned to me almost as if to ask what to do. If I could fix this one, if I had the answers, and they just kept saying, yo no sé, yo no sé, I don't know. I really didn't know. All I knew that night was that my father had been arrested. I didn't know that night that the rest of my life would change. And that night, once again, I was reminded of what it meant to be unwelcome. So, to this day, we still don't know why my father was arrested. We went to the hearing, we checked the records, but at some point, all of the stories get told differently. Something about a broken taillight, something about alcohol, something about the passenger in the car carrying something. But at the end of the day, the stories are always foggy, and at the end of the day, all they really needed was a reason, and they had one. So my father was behind bars, and for the first couple of months, we weren't even able to see him because with it, we lacked proper identification, whatever that means. So we settled for having friends of friends with driver's licenses relay messages back and forth for us. He told us how everything was going to be okay, how he was going to be out soon. He even told us he had just cashed his paycheck. The police officer told him to leave it in the car, but when we went to get the car from where they had stashed it, there was no money left. And then he told me that as the eldest, I was now the man of the house. Eventually, he got transferred to an immigration facility in San Francisco, then out to another jail in the North Bay, and then to Glenn Meyer facility in Oakland. And that's where we were finally able to go see him. So we would go about once a week, usually on Sundays after church, because my mom begged us to go and pray so that something good could come out of this. So we would go, we would talk to him, leave some money whenever we could. We would do that jail thing where you put your hand against the glass and they touch it. And it was the worst feeling because we were so close, and yet still so far away. We would tell him about how good we were doing. I would tell him about college, about all the great activities we were doing. We would tell him about how I was going to my sister's parent-teacher conferences. He would tell us how good things were going for him too, how he was going to be out soon. We didn't talk about deportation. We didn't talk about how scared we were not to see him again. We didn't tell him about how anxious we were to not be able to see him, touch him, hug him, or just be next to him ever again. We went every week, and every time I visited, the strong and proud aura that he had slowly diminished little by little. And every time I kept going, he looked smaller and smaller and smaller, and one day he just looked broken. We didn't tell him about us losing our home. We didn't tell him about the car that they had gotten repossessed, about the extra hours my mom had spent in her job. We didn't tell him about how much my mother cried, my sister cried, and how little my brother and I did. We worked so hard. We worked so hard, and it seems like everything that we worked for got taken away. My dad's 17 years, my mom's 10, and our 8. And at some point, we ended up having to move back to that immigrant home that we started with, where my mother and my sister shared the bed, and my brother and I shared the floor. My brother and myself shared the floor, while my mother and my sister shared the bed. And we stayed there for a couple of years. My father was transferred once again to another facility in Southern California, and then one more time to Arizona, and then finally deported back to Mexico, where he was told if he were to come back, he would spend at least 10 years in jail. So he decided it was best to stay. Our family here is working hard to get back on our feet. As you guys heard, we've had a couple successes in my family. My mother and my sister eventually moved out of that immigrant home. My brother and I stayed because we wanted to stick together. My father, on the other hand, still struggles every single day trying to get used to the idea of not living in the United States, of not being able to get a job, of not being with us, of being by himself. So whenever we can, we send him money about once a month, or we contact him about once a month, just like he did when he was in the US and we were in Mexico. Being undocumented means that I can't go see him if I want to continue my life in the US. And everything still hurts. Everything hurts so much. Every time that I am reminded of it, and I get reminded of every single day, whether it's walking by somebody that looks like him, whether it's by hearing the news of another immigration reform getting denied, or this time when we got a letter in the mail addressed to him. So my brother and myself, we try to stay strong. We try to be big. We try to be scary, just like him. And always have this look on our face that lets everyone know that everything is gonna be okay and we got it all figured out. Thank you.